The Mind and Body in Conflict Resolution, part of the series Mediator Well-Being for Effective Mediations with Julia Morelli. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hi again, everyone. This is Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney, mediator, and arbitrator, working throughout Florida and Texas.
Natalia Łowska-Czajka, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland, and I am happy to present our dear guest, Julia Morelli, who kindly agreed to be with us on the new series that we are planning to do with her, which will be talking about things that are sometimes omitted, but are inevitably so important, meaning the connection between the mind and the body and how it all plays within the conflict resolution. And Julia, you are the dispute resolution practitioner, and can you please tell us more about your background and what you've been doing and what led you to actually being an expert on these topics, dealing with mind and body in conflicts and conflict resolution?
Thank you very much. First, I appreciate the opportunity. This is a combination of topics that I've been passionate about for many, many years. The practice that I have as a mediator is within organizations. I do organizational development and also workplace coaching. So the skills that I've learned through the mind-body connection have come into play in all of those arenas. And recently, I had the privilege of being named as a senior fellow with George Mason University's Center for the Advancement of Well-Being.
Great. Thank you so much, Julia. And something that folks may or may not know about you, you're the spouse of Daniel Rainey, who's also a contributor to this podcast. And I know we're looking forward to you and Dan speaking together pretty soon on co-mediation. And wanted to proceed now to the main topic of why we have you on today, which is to discuss the mind and body in conflict resolution. So first off, what is the connection between the mind and body and conflict?
Oftentimes what happens is we tend to ignore the fact that what happens with the body also affects what happens in our minds. So for instance, if I tend to be kind of curled up and hunched over, then I'm drawing into myself and I'm physically tensing my muscles. One of the things that happens when I'm doing that is that it also makes my mind less free, less open, and it then affects what's happening in my mind. So it's also important to recognize that what happens in our heads, which we live in our heads, that's where we tend to stay, is that then also affects our body. So recognizing that those two things they interact with each other, and if you can notice what's happening in your mind and or your body and then try to work with that, you can more effectively deal with a stressful situation. And conflict by its very nature is stressful. One of the reasons I'm particularly passionate about it is because as conflict resolution practitioners, frequently we tend to forget that we can be affected by other people's conflict. So I think that it's very important to recognize that we're not just, somebody who can just be around literally negative energy and people who are in disagreement without that having an impact on us.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Natalia.
Thank you so much for stating that, Julia, because I do believe that in mediation, we need to take into account so many factors connected with conflict. There are the people in conflict, but we are also subject to different stress in our lives. And In here, we need to handle our own emotions connected with some external factors, as well as the conflict that we are actually exposed to during mediation. You've been mediating many years, and first, if you could let us hear what your experience with that was, what sort of external signs of people not managing those emotions well you could see, so that the mediators who will be listening to us would also use that as a part of their knowledge, as a part of the mediator's package.
So I'm not sure if I'm gonna be answering it exactly as you asked it, but one of the experiences that I had that really was a defining moment for me was I was doing a group mediation, and there were 16 men and me, and we got to the point and they all had separate agendas, so it wasn't like there were teams of them, and we got to the point where there was an absolute stalemate, and in my head started racing. I started going through what would so and so do, who can I call, what can I do to, because I'm not quite sure what to do in this particular moment. And what I did was I actually went into the ladies' room, and this may sound crazy, but I went into the ladies' room and started practicing something called mindful movement. So I practiced qigong, which is similar to tai chi. So I started doing a breathing and movement pattern, and that was for me so that I could then get myself in a better place to be able to work with them. I walked back into the room. I had called a break actually at that point in time. I didn't tell them why I called the break. I went in, I did the Qigong practice, and I went back into the room. I'm not sure exactly what it was that I did, but when I went back in there, my head was in a much better place and I was able to work with them more effectively. And suddenly things started to flow in a much more effective way.
God, thank you. And before we get into some practical steps that mediators can do to manage their stress, can you speak a little bit about how does it work where two parties who don't like each other very much or who have a lot of conflict, how does that, I guess, interplay with the mediator, a mediator who may just love people and gives of herself, exceedingly much. What's been your experience like, or have you come up with, I guess, some kind of framework to understand it? I just want to pick your brain on that. How does it work between parties and their conflicts, and how it affects the mediator?
You mean the impact that it has on the mediator?
Yes.
One of the things that winds up happening is that the tension that the two, say it's a two-party mediation that is going on between the two of them, winds up to some extent getting absorbed by the mediator. And I would say that the impact or the influence that that has on the mediator is going to vary depending on a whole lot of factors. One of those factors may very well be what happened with the mediator just before the mediator started working with them. Because one of
Oh,
the things that we have to recognize is that if we've had something really bad happen right before we go in to mediate, then the likelihood of being adversely affected by what's happening between the two of them is going to become more challenging.
do you think that this is more acute in, say, mediations like family law mediations than, say, something that's gonna deal with, just contracts?
I would say the answer is yes. I intentionally am not a family mediator. I have been told that family mediation is actually very much like organizational mediation is a lot like family mediation in terms of dynamics, particularly when you're talking about long-term relationships and they've gotten, uh, dysfunctional over time. So I think that yes, it definitely can affect more when you're dealing with family mediation. That said, all conflict is personal, and somebody can react to a a contract conflict in a way that also has the feeling of very personal elements. So I think the idea that family is necessarily that much more personal, yes, it is, and the other type can be very personal as well.
Thank you so much, Julia, for that. But if I understand the topic we're discussing today correctly, is that by wanting to speak to us about it, you wanted to enhance all the mediators to really take care of their mind and body during the conflict and during mediation, as well as the mind and bodies of the participants. And I think it is the time when we should be touching on how to do that practically. So, back to the question I previously asked, how you can notice something is going wrong, someone needs, I wouldn't say protection, but addressing certain issues, and how then to build some sort of a Chinese wall not to get affected by people's stress, by people's sometimes tensions that then appear and also tend to be taken against the mediator.
So there is a term that has become very popular, and that is mindfulness, which at its core is basically being able to notice something happening in a particular moment. So there are two types of mindfulness that the mediator can engage in. One is what's happening in the mediator's mind. So literally observing what's happening in my head. Is it getting feeling like it's frenetic? I'm having a hard time, listening and so forth. Or am I also perhaps feeling a tightness in my shoulders or a tightness in my jaw? And the most practical tip is using the breath, so that the breath is something that tends to speed up when we're under stress. So being aware of physiologically what's happening under stress. So that can be the muscles tightening, it's the heart racing, it's the feeling in the pit of the stomach. It's all of those physiological cues that we have, and being able to notice where they are and being able to literally stretch them out. For instance, there was one time I was mediating, and across the table from me, one of the participants was taking very writing down with a pencil, and I could tell that the writing was heavy and hard. And I thought, that's really interesting. And then I noticed that I was sitting on the edge of my chair and I was all tense. And what I decided was, that's even more interesting, because what I realized was what was happening with me was affecting um, my ability to be able to work with them. So what I did in that particular instance was I sat back. I still stayed up nice and tall, because that's how I tend to be, and then started slowing my breath. So just being able to deepen the breath engages a relaxation response. So it gets you out of what's known as the amygdala hijack, which is where the body gets stressed out, and the part of the brain that is essentially the fight or flight response takes over, and it makes it much harder to have the rational brain become engaged. So if you see or hear in the voices of participants a lot of stress and a lot of tension and anxiety, then it might be time to call for a break. It might be there are times, particularly when I've been mediating in person, that I'll say, I'm going to get up and take a stretch break. You're welcome to join me.
Thank you for that. And how does this all interplay with Zoom mediations or online mediations? Do you think that online might, I don't know, dissipate the tensions a little bit, or do you think it actually heightens it? What are your thoughts?
It does both.
Hmm.
That's my sense, is it does both, because one of the things that happens when we're on camera is that that's a very draining process, particularly if you're trying to maintain eye contact. And in a Zoom setting, for instance, it's harder to be able to maintain eye contact, if you will, depending on where your camera is and so forth. There is a general rule that in terms of our exposure with the screen, we should take 20 seconds to look 20 feet um, every 20 minutes to be able to, one, give our eyes a chance to relax, but it also gives us a chance to take a break. So, in the Zoom setting, I think paying attention to how long you're going and intentionally building in those breaks so that the expectation is that a break is going to be coming up. And that said, it's much better to make sure that you've planned that break ahead of time, because if they're in the middle of a very intense discussion, then trying to call for a break can be a bit more challenging unless you've set the expectation up on the front end.
Thank you for that. And how about uh, prevention? Can we prevent the stress on affecting us in mediation when people come to us with distress? How to prepare ourselves to handle the stress that we are in front of and we are about to help other people to release and ease in their lives?
So that goes back to what's going to work for you as an individual, because what works for me may or may not work for you. And a lot of it goes back to knowing yourself and knowing what it is that you need. For instance, one of the things that helps me stay um, feeling more centered and calm is having a connection with nature. So something that might help me is something as simple as having a plant nearby or flowers, or taking a walk before I start the mediation. So I also have a yoga practice. So even if it's 3 minutes of yoga, or if it's doing a qigong practice just for a very short time ahead of time, those are some of the things that at least help me. So I think a lot of it depends on what's going to work for you, but movement, I would say, is really the key to being able to try to dissipate that sense of stress.
Thank you. And looks like our time is almost up. But before we go, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about Holistic Solutions Incorporated, which is the organization that you and your husband set up. And just what I'm going to be sharing the screen now. If somebody's listening to this podcast, simply go to the YouTube channel for Innocent Mediations, the Lawyers and Mediators International channel, and you'll be able to see what we are currently sharing right now. So, Julia, tell us a little bit about Holistic Solutions and the work you do there.
So Dan and I work together as well as separately. So some of the things that we do are mediations. Dan also works with people online in arbitrations. I teach well-being practices and stress management. So that means teaching yoga and qigong and so forth. Also group facilitations and or organizational interventions.
Got it. And what is the work that you do at the university?
My primary job actually is running a nonprofit affiliated with the university, but I also do, I'm a workplace coach, and I also provide training in areas such as, difficult conversations and working with people who are in conflict, and then trying to work with various departments where there is a lot of organizational change and stress. So oftentimes I incorporate the mind body practices in those various trainings and the things that I do, and I've gotten very good responses in terms of people recognizing that taking care of themselves and understanding that what's happening in their mind and body actually makes a difference, has been something that seems to be very well received.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. You remind me of a mediation that I did years ago where both spouses, I live in Texas, of course, so it's going to involve guns, but both spouses in a divorce mediation came packing heat. Basically, but they were gun lovers, and the guns were part of the property that was meant to be divided. So I think about that story all the time because I remember imagining, if something was to really go awry in this meeting right now. Or if somebody became so irate and so upset, I wonder what they might be willing to do, because one of them was actually joking about the fact that they had a weapon on them. So I think if mediators can have the skills to know how to, you know, help parties calm down and help themselves calm down, and how to approach a mediation in a calm way, and help people take breaks when the time is proper, then I think we can have more effective mediations that are less dangerous, less threatening, and just have less stress. So I thank you so much for the tips that you've given, because this is something that we don't talk too often about. We talk about the parties a lot, but I think we got to focus also on the mediator and their well-being and what they can do to make sure that the mediation is going to not go off the rails. So, Natalia, anything you want to add?
Yes, I want to thank from the bottom of my heart to Julia for agreeing to be with us and to address all those issues. And a call to mediators: please take care of yourselves and follow things that will enable you to be yourself, not lose temper, and save your emotions for the times when you really need them.
Thank you so much, Julia.
Thank you.